Step away from the casket! Now! You don't belong here, the officer growled, his hand tightening on his holster. The man didn't move. He didn't speak. He just kept his eyes on the flag-covered casket. I said step back! The officer barked louder, now pulling his gun out of the holster. Finally, the man turned, calm, unshaken. His voice was low but steady. Put the gun down, you're making a mistake. Oh, so now you're giving me orders? The cop snapped. You threatening me? The man said nothing. He just stared, like he was trying to hold back a wave of something bigger than anger. A woman gasped from behind the rows of chairs. Someone whispered, "He has a gun!" Phones were pulled out. A child started crying. The man, still silent, stood between the casket and the officer. His shoulders didn't flinch even as the barrel pointed right at his chest. Not even a blink. "Who are you here for?" the cop demanded. "You a guest or just wandered in?" No response. "You think dressing in a suit makes you less of a threat?" The man raised one eyebrow. "Tell me your name," the officer ordered. "Now!" The silence was deafening. People began to shift nervously, but no one moved closer. The man was clearly respected, but feared too. Not because of anything he did, because of the way he stood, calm, still, controlled. "Last chance," the cop warned. "Get your hands where I can see them, or you're going down." The man looked away, back to the casket. "That's my brother," he said quietly. "He died in Afghanistan, saving lives." The cop didn't lower his weapon. If anything, he gripped it harder. "Back away now, or I will shoot." The man finally looked him in the eyes. "You're scared because I'm not. And you hate that." That triggered something. The officer's hand trembled. Another man, older, in a black suit, stepped forward quickly. "Officer Kane, stop. That's Major General Langston. He's the one who paid for this funeral." Kane blinked. "The hell did you just say?" "That's General Langston, 4-star. He's not just a mourner. This is his funeral. His brothers! He's the reason you're even standing here." Kane's eyes narrowed. "I don't care what he is." He refused to identify himself, looked aggressive, suspicious. He stood still, the older man replied. "You pulled the gun." The phone cameras were everywhere now, live, recording, broadcasting. Langston didn't say another word. He just stood there. Strong. Quiet. Like he'd seen worse than this. Because he had. The air felt frozen. Morning had turned into chaos. Nobody looked at the casket anymore. All eyes were on the officer and the gun. And the man refusing to step back. A young girl whispered to her mother, "Why's the policeman aiming at the soldier?" Her mother didn't answer. Her eyes were full of tears. "You're going to regret this moment for the rest of your life," Langston said again, calmly. The officer's lips curled slightly. "Is that a threat, General?" "No," Langston replied. "That's a fact." More whispers. A pastor tried to speak, but his voice got caught in his throat. The casket sat untouched, surrounded by folded flags and wilted flowers. "Dispatch, this is Officer Kane," he barked into his radio. "Got a possible threat at the veteran service. Male, black, mid-40s, 6'3", uncooperative." The voice on the other end paused longer than usual. "Say again?" "Suspicious subject, doesn't belong, no ID, refusing orders." "Sir, we have a record. That's General Michael Langston, 4-star active duty. His brother was Staff Sergeant Langston at today's funeral." Silence. "Repeat?" Kane asked again, his voice now shaky. "Sir, put the weapon down. That's not just any man. That's the highest-ranking officer in this state." Kane didn't move. His body was frozen. His hands had gone pale from how hard he was gripping the gun. General Langston slowly stepped forward, only one small step. You see a tall black man standing alone, and all you saw was a threat, not a grieving brother, not a soldier, not a human. "That's not true," Kane muttered, but it was too late. The words, the eyes, the phones, the truth, it had already cut through the moment like a blade. Langston stepped closer. Now they were only inches apart. "I've bled for this country," he said softly. "I've buried men who died protecting it. But the moment I take off my uniform and stand in front of a coffin, you aim a gun at me. I didn't know." Exactly. Kane's hand dropped an inch, then another. Then he collapsed, right there on the grass. No gunfire, no struggle. Just the full weight of what he'd done crashing into his chest like a boulder. Paramedics rushed in. The crowd barely moved. Langston never looked down at him. He turned instead to face the casket, gently placing one gloved hand on top of it. "I told you I'd make it home, Marcus," he whispered. "I just didn't know I'd have to survive this too." Nobody spoke. Nobody clapped. Nobody dared. The only sound was the soft clicking of cameras and the quiet sound of one officer, breathing heavy into the dirt, finally realizing exactly who he had pointed a gun at. "Say that again?" "Sir, put the gun down. You're pointing it at a US general." Kane didn't move. His face twitched. For a moment, the entire funeral went completely silent. Even the crying stopped. His radio crackled again. "Repeat." "That's Major General Michael Langston. Active duty, 4 stars, Pentagon clearance. That man is military royalty." Kane's fingers slowly loosened around the grip of his gun. His knuckles were white. Sweat poured from his forehead. Across from him, General Langston still hadn't moved. His calm was terrifying, not because it looked forced, but because it wasn't. The kind of calm only a man who'd been shot at before could carry. The kind of calm Kane couldn't fake if his life depended on it. "You didn't ask who I was," Langston said again, voice low. "You didn't ask anything. You just saw my skin." And that's when Kane's knees buckled. He didn't faint. Not fully. But he stumbled, one hand going to the grass, the other still loosely holding the weapon, now pointed toward the dirt. The funeral director rushed forward. "Someone take that gun!" he shouted. A younger black officer, maybe mid-30s clearly, nervous, stepped in, disarmed Kane, and helped him to his feet. Not out of sympathy, but out of necessity. People were recording. The moment had become history. The gun was gone. The damage was not. Langston finally stepped forward, walking around the disarmed cop like he wasn't even there. He stopped in front of the casket, looked down. "Marcus didn't die for this," he whispered. Nobody spoke. The widow wept harder now, hand over her mouth, body trembling. Not because of the funeral, but because of the humiliation. Langston didn't wipe his eyes. He didn't raise his voice. But his next words cut like glass. "I've buried men who fell in combat. I've stood beside soldiers as they bled out on enemy soil. But nothing, not war, not death, prepared me for today. A day when I'd stand over my little brother's body and be told I don't belong here." A young soldier in dress blues saluted him from the crowd. Langston returned the salute, but his eyes never left the casket. "He called me the night before his last mission," Langston continued. "Said he missed home, said he was proud of me.
said he'd make it back. He paused. He did come back. In a box, people began to sob. Real, raw sobs. Not the kind you hide. The kind that comes when dignity is stripped in front of you and no one stops it. And even now, Langston said, voice breaking just slightly, even now, after the sacrifice, the medals, the tears, I'm still a threat. Still a suspect, still a question mark with skin too dark to be trusted. He turned then, looked directly at Kane, who was sitting on the grass now, both hands over his face. What would have happened if no one spoke up? He asked. What? If the cameras weren't rolling? No one answered. You were ready to shoot me at my own brother's funeral. Without a word, without a name. You don't see me, Officer Kane. You only see fear, and you pointed it straight at me. A reporter was already on the sidewalk outside the gates, microphone in hand. The news had arrived. Langston looked back to the casket. I flew 18 hours to be here. I buried my last mission commander last month. I've done 4 deployments, carried men out of hell with my bare hands. But nothing stings like being treated like a criminal when I'm trying to grieve. The young black officer who had disarmed Kane stepped beside Langston now, helmet in hand, voice shaking. Sir, I grew up hearing your name. In the academy, we watched a whole module on your campaigns. They told us you were a legend. I'm so sorry. Langston looked at him. It's not your fault, but it is your fight, the officer nodded, eyes red. Yes, sir. The widow stood now, walked over slowly. She wrapped her arms around Langston, leaning her head on his shoulder. He held her gently. I'm sorry, Michael, she whispered. You shouldn't have had to fight again today. He didn't answer. He just held her tighter. Later, day. The footage hit social media before the burial was even complete. One clip showed the exact moment the gun was drawn. Another showed the radio call confirming Langston's identity. A third showed the confrontation. Langston's calm, Kane's panic. Within hours, hashtags were trending. General, Langston, Jutland funeral, targeted. Gun at a general. The video crossed 1 million views by sunset. The police department released a statement. We are conducting an internal investigation. Officer Kane has been placed on administrative leave pending review. But the people weren't waiting. A crowd gathered outside. The station by nightfall, candles, flags, signs. Black soldiers deserve respect. A badge is not a license to humiliate. We saw it. We felt it. We won't forget. At the military base, Langston returned to his quarters late. He hadn't slept, didn't eat. He opened the file on his brother's last deployment. Photos, letters, medals. He stared at a letter Marcus had written but never sent. Mike, if anything happens to me, just know I was proud to serve. Proud to be your brother. Don't let this world break you. They need you more than you know. Langston folded the letter. Slowly, carefully. He placed it inside his jacket. Then he turned to his laptop. Opened a secure email. Subject line, formal. Complaint, Officer Jonathan Kane, civil rights violation. Attached, witness statements, funeral video clips, radio transcripts, past misconduct files. Langston stared at the screen for a long time before hitting send. He whispered,
Only 3 words. This is war. Man down, someone muttered, as Officer Kane hit the ground, clutching his chest. Langston didn't flinch. He just stood over him, calm, while others ran to help. But no one helped Kane. The paramedics came. They asked if he was okay. But
most eyes were still on Langston. He didn't move, he didn't speak, he just watched. Kane sat up slowly, humiliated. He wasn't hurt, just overwhelmed. The weight of what he did had finally landed on him, and it crushed him harder than any bullet ever could. Someone handed him water. He waved it away. "I didn't know," he mumbled. Langston finally turned. "You didn't ask." That one line, cold, precise, was louder than a courtroom verdict. 3 days later, Langston walked into the federal building. Quiet, direct, no press, no entourage, just him, a file folder, and the eyes of every security guard tracking his every step. "Sir," the clerk at the desk said, standing quickly. "We weren't expecting. I'm here to speak with the Civil Rights Division. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but they'll want to hear what I brought." 5 minutes later, Langston stood in front of the glass office door. Behind it, a woman in a suit blinked up at him. "General Langston?" "Yes, this is about Officer Jonathan Kane." She nodded slowly. "We've seen the footage." "Then you haven't seen the rest?" He handed her the folder. She opened it. Her face tightened. Inside, 6 civilian complaints against Kane in the past 4 years, 3 internal reviews, all cleared, 1 handwritten letter from a teenager who was held at gunpoint in his own driveway because Kane thought he fit the description, a police body cam transcript where Kane called a black veteran a threat in uniform, and the full radio log from the funeral showing how long it took the dispatch to correct Kane's suspicious subject report. "Where
Did you get this?" the woman whispered. "Let's just say, I have access."
"We can open a federal inquiry, DOJ level. Are you willing to testify?" "I'm not just willing," Langston said. "I'm ready." Meanwhile, local news. Interview Kane sat stiffly across from a reporter. His face was pale, his hands twisted nervously in his lap. The gun was gone now, not just from his belt, but from his entire identity. Without it, he looked small. "Why did you draw your weapon at a funeral?" the reporter asked directly. Kane shifted. "I was trained to respond to threats. I saw someone not cooperating. I made a call." "Do you think you made the right call?" "No, I think I made a human mistake." "A mistake that could have killed a US general." Silence. "I've seen things happen," Kane said, "where hesitation cost lives. But he wasn't aggressive. I didn't know that at the time. Because he was black? I can't speak to..."
"What was in my subconscious?" the reporter leaned in. "What if your subconscious is the problem?"
Kane didn't answer. That night, Langston's home, Langston sat alone, rereading the letter Marcus had written before his final mission. "Mike, the world's gonna see you differently when the war's over. They'll either salute you or fear you. But don't let either reaction control your next move." He folded the letter slowly. Then his phone buzzed. Text from DOJ Federal Counsel. "Official civil rights investigation into Officer Kane authorized. Press briefing in 48 hours. You'll be asked to testify publicly." Langston stared at the message. He didn't want the spotlight. He didn't want attention, but he wasn't going to let this fade either. He replied, "Confirmed. I'll be there." Hours later, Federal Press Room. Langston stood behind a podium, not in uniform, but in a black suit with a silver pin on his lapel.
Marcus's unit insignia."
"Good morning. My name is Michael Langston. I serve this country as a 4-star general. But today I speak as a black man who stood over his brother's casket while a police officer pointed a gun at my heart." The room was silent. Cameras flashed. Recorders rolled. This isn't about one moment. It's about every moment that looks like it, but doesn't get filmed, doesn't go viral, doesn't get justice. This time it was me, but next time it could be your son, your father, your friend in uniform. He lifted the funeral photo. This is Marcus. He died in combat. The flag on his casket was the same flag Kane claimed to protect when he pulled.
That trigger. But what Kane didn't realize was this: I've spent my whole life learning how to stay calm under pressure. He couldn't go 10 seconds without panicking in front of a uniformed black man. Langston held up a second.
Photo: Marcus and Langston laughing during childhood, both wearing toy soldier helmets. He didn't just disrespect a soldier. He disrespected a family, a history, a legacy, and he pointed a loaded gun at all of it. He leaned forward into the mic. If America wants to call us heroes, then she needs to stop treating us like suspects. 2 days later, Kane's arrest federal agents arrived early. No media, no warning, just a knock on the door. Jonathan Kane? Yeah. You're being charged under federal civil rights violations, excessive use of force, and abuse of authority. Kane didn't fight it. He was silent as they cuffed him, silent as they walked him to the car, silent as the neighbors peeked out of their windows. But one thing was clear: silence couldn't protect him anymore. Final scene: Marcus's grave. Langston stood alone at the headstone. No ceremony this time. Just peace. Just truth. He knelt down, brushing the leaves off the grave. They tried to silence what you meant, Marcus, but the world saw. He paused. They'll remember your name, not just for how you died, but for what your death revealed. He placed a single medal on the stone. Rest now, I've got this. He stood, turned, and walked away. Not defeated, not broken, but ready for whatever fight came next. Do you understand the charges against you, Mr. Kane? He didn't speak, didn't nod, didn't even look up. The judge's voice was calm but absolute. Unlawful use of a firearm, racially motivated threat, violation of civil protections, guaranteed under federal law, and knowingly endangering the life of a high-ranking U.S. military officer during a ceremonial funeral. Still nothing. Kane just sat there, eyes blank. Hands clenched so tight the cuffs left marks. Langston sat across the courtroom, not on the stand, not in the spotlight, just there. Quiet, watching, his uniform sharp, his presence louder than any speech. He hadn't come for drama. He'd come for a moment that was long overdue, and when the judge said it, slowly, clearly, without emotion, the air in the room froze. Mr. Kane, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. No one gasped, no one clapped, because it wasn't about celebration, it was about closure. Langston didn't blink, didn't smile, just exhaled. Finally, the courtroom emptied slowly. Reporters didn't shout, spectators didn't cheer. Only one woman wept in the back, Kane's mother. And even then, she didn't ask for mercy. She whispered the same thing again and again, hands over her mouth. What did you do, John? What did you do? Kane was taken away. No words, no goodbye, just silence. And that silence, it said more than any defense ever could. 2 days later, Langston stood outside the federal prison, papers in hand. He had just signed the final form, a formal request that Officer Jonathan Kane serve his life sentence in a military-affiliated federal facility. A place filled with soldiers, veterans and guards trained to recognize exactly who Langston was. He didn't do it to punish him. He did it so that every single day Kane would wake up knowing who he pulled that gun on. Not a stranger, not a suspect, but a decorated general who had bled for the same country. Kane claimed to serve. Weeks passed. The funeral footage kept playing on news loops. Langston refused interviews, turned down a documentary. He didn't want fame, he wanted peace. But peace didn't come easy when the whole country wanted a quote. He gave just one to a school, to a group of young black cadets standing in line for ROTC training. They asked him what to do when the uniform wasn't enough. Langston looked at them, young, wide-eyed, still believing. He said only this: "You wear the uniform with pride, but you carry your skin with power. The world will test both. Don't let it break you." And then he walked away. No applause, just the sound of boots clicking in respect. That night, Langston visited Marcus's grave again. No crowd, no cameras, just the wind and the whisper of the flag beside the headstone. He knelt, placed a folded piece of paper on the stone. Marcus's letter, the one he'd kept close since the day he came home in a box. "You kept your promise," Langston whispered. "You made it back. And I kept mine. I made sure they saw you." His voice cracked, not from weakness, but from release, the kind that comes when you know your fight is over. He stood, saluted the grave one last time, and turned to leave. But something in him paused. He looked up at the night sky. Stars above him, medals in his chest pocket, pain behind him, but peace, finally, ahead. Langston never testified again, never stood in another courtroom, but his name became something more than military. It became memory. Proof that dignity didn't die in the face of injustice. That calm could be louder than chaos, and that even when the world tried to strip you down to nothing but color, you could still stand, still speak, still survive.